Alright, we'll begin this half of the review with a really exciting card. It's the dragon that everyone wanted when they were playing dragons. It's the 4 mana big dragon with taunt. In a dragon deck, Twilight Guardian is basically a 3/6 with taunt for 4 mana, and that's a good deal. People see this as like a Fen Creeper, which just costs 1 less mana, but it turns out that if Fen Creeper costs 1 less mana, that's really good. In a world where Sen'jin is like almost being played, just adding 1 more health is a big deal. And it's a dragon itself, which means it adds things. A good card to include in dragon decks, which will be control decks, of course. And in Arena, this card is a 4 mana 2/6. The 4 mana 2/6 is below the curve because you could just play a turtle, so it'll be bad in Arena, unless you have a lot of dragons. Undercity Valiant can be compared to SI7 Agent by quite a lot. It's got the combo, deal 1 damage. It has basically the vanilla stats, 2 mana 3/2 like the SI's 3 mana 3/3. The dream of this is your opponent plays the Leper Gnome, and then you coin out Undercity Valiant, and then you're pretty far ahead. The question though is how many cards can you support which have this combo in the early game, in which you'd probably use the coin. And Backstab, by the way, also becomes a lot better. I think this card's quite fair and comparably good to SI7 Agent, especially better if there's more aggressive decks. SI7 Agent turns out to often kill things with 1 health also. A good card which could actually see play in Constructed. In Arena, this card's going to obviously be good since it's a 2 mana 3/2 with an upside. Next up we have Wildwalker, which is another beast synergy card for Druids. This shares a lot of similarities with the upgraded Repair Bot from Priests, which is a 5 mana 5/5 Battlecry, give a friendly mech plus 4 health. It turns out though that that card wasn't seeing that much play in Priest because the mechs just weren't quite working out enough. Druids, we're going to see whether or not this is going to be the same case. We saw a lot of good beasts get released, which could fit the Druid theme, and this card, when you think about it, it's like a 4 mana 4/7 if you get it to work successfully. This could really be a thing. It's good value. The beast deck, I think this will make it in. We'll see whether or not the beast deck is competitive enough to actually see competitive play. And yeah, it's that Druid of the Fang deck, so it seems like our enablers will be Druid of the Fang and Wildwalker. In Arena, this card is going to depend based on how many beasts you have. An interesting priest card. When you look at it on face value, it's basically 2 mana, draw a card. And that's obviously bad. But the thing is, you very specifically get to target something. It's really slow in tempo, and it's really bad against aggressive decks. And it's only enemy minions, so you can't even copy your own stuff. In a world where Mind Vision wasn't good enough, which is copy like a random enemy minion, random card in your enemy's hand, will Convert possibly see play? I think it's too slow, but it's an interesting card. I think it would have been really interesting if it were 1 mana. I mean, the card itself is still interesting, but it would have been even more interesting if it were 1 mana. If you think about Mind Control, it's like Convert plus kill the opponent's minion, plus you play the minion that you just killed. In Arena, like, it's also slow enough, and there's not usually great targets to target to justify Convert, I think. So Enter the Coliseum is an interesting take on Brawl, where it's actually set up so that everyone knows the results of the brawl. It's pretty interesting because you can enter the Coliseum and leave exactly 1 opponent minion alive, which you as a Paladin then can do like Aldor Peacekeeper to, or Humility, just as a 7 mana card. Both players are going to keep a minion, so those times where the aggro deck is flooding you and you play like a minion and they ignore it, you can then enter the Coliseum them, and then you can use your minion to kill their minion, and that's very epic and reminiscent of a Coliseum duel, which I'm sure all of the Coliseum managers will be happy to see. I'm not sure if this card is going to replace or be a supplement to the Equality Consecration combos, which were board clears. Sure seems like it costs a lot of mana, but it has a potential to get everyone out of here. I'm not entirely sure what happens in the case of ties, but we'll probably figure that out soon enough in terms of clarifications. It's probably going to be based off of whichever card is played first or some such. In Arena, just because you know the effect is coming, you're going to be able to plan around it a bit more. It's like a Twisting Nether, which costs 2 less, but it comes with this twist, but the twist can be to your upside. So I think in Arena this will be a fun card, a very swingy one, and that'll be cool. Fencing Coach! Oh my gosh, this is the card that I didn't know whether or not it would be printed, but now that it's printed, I'm so excited by it. This is the card to look out for, I think. In a world where Inspire is so pushed as a theme, this one gives you 1 freebie use of the Inspire, and that's a really big deal. In a deck where you are going to use the hero power anyways, this is basically a 1 mana 2/2. And even better, you're basically like setting up whenever you want to use that hero power. This is the card that was needed to make Wilfred Fizzlebang, we'll bring him back here, usable. So now you can actually play Fizzlebang on 6 and then just tap. Nice. I mean, every Inspire deck is probably going to consider running Fencing Coach. It's a great card. I think Life Coach should have been the one chosen to like preview this card. It would have been too obvious, but that's a really cool card. I expect to see a lot of it. In Arena, it's going to be good, just because you're probably going to find some time to use your hero power, and the hero power doesn't usually cost 2, but like when you add in like any Inspire cards, you could just play this, and then later on, you just play your Inspire card, use the hero power. It's good stuff. I'm probably most excited that this card makes Wilfred Fizzlebang actually a possible deck to be played. Okay, we got the ice version of Cobalt Geomancer, the Frigid Snobold. It's a lot tougher than Cobalt Geomancer. You pay 2 mana for 4 extra health. You're too slow. You're also too slow in Arena. Pass. Well, hold on, before I pass. You can compare this in Arena to the Oasis Snapjaw. In decks where you have a lot of spells that do damage, it's going to be slightly better than the turtle. So that means, in some cases, it's going to be an average card. Before you think about comboing this card with Master of Ceremonies, don't. Okay, so this card can be compared with Corehound. For a 1 mana discount, you get 1 less attack, so that's a good deal, since Corehound costs too much and had like way more attack than it needed anyways. 6 mana 8/5 probably wouldn't be played if it was just vanilla, but good news, it's not vanilla. Bad news, it's a downside. Good news, sometimes the downside is an upside because you can get past taunt. Bad news, that's usually not desired. It's a bad card. In Arena, it's a bad card too. I guess it probably would have been good to compare this with Salty Dog also, which is not being played in Constructed and is bad in Arena. For 1 more mana, you get +1/+1. That's not really good enough. On top of that, you get the downside. It's bad. Mulch. An interesting take on Naturalize. Better than Naturalize, probably. 3 mana to assassinate, basically. And then any minion in the game can be in the opponent's hand. That's pretty crazy. I figure in decks where you'd want to clear an opponent's minion and not really care about the downside, Naturalize was a reasonable card to think about. It's kind of like 3 mana discard a card because you're making the opponent draw a card. The card varies wildly in how good it is, but the point is all cards still have a mana cost, and even if you give them a really high mana cost card, they might not have the ability to get it. It's a little bit like Sap. Unstable Sap, basically. No, it's actually a better Sap, most of the time. Yeah, almost most of the time it's a better Sap, because cards you would want to Sap, you would probably rather them have a random minion. And yes, there's the mill decks, where you don't even give them a card, but I don't really see that happening. But yeah, you could do the Naturalize, Mulch, Cold Light Oracle deck. Kind of silly, but there you have it. This card might allow the control decks to get a bit faster. It's a little bit less good than Sap in the sense that you can't sap the Shredder, and Shredder is a card that you would usually want to sap for the tempo. You can't mulch the Shredder, so meh. There's a lot of cards with Death Rattle that you end up wanting to sap. So I think it's comparable to Sap. It's interesting to see where this will line up. In Arena, it's, I want to say good. It's like a cheap Assassinate, and they draw a card though, but it's a random card. But in Arena, it's kind of mostly random cards, but usually draft the good cards. It's interesting. Kind of difficult to assess. I think it's one of those cards which you need to try out to see. I think it has the potential to work. Powershot is a cool hunter control card. It's like Explosive Shot, but it costs 2 less mana, and it's kind of like Consecration because it's a little bit rare for your opponents to have that many cards. So it's like a 1 mana discount on Consecration almost. I kind of like it. It's pretty good. This card would be played in many control decks. So that it was put into a hunter deck is really interesting. Pushes a control hunter agenda. I like that. In a world where Consecration is a good card, Powershot is a great card. It just needs the right deck. It's definitely going to make it into the lock and load deck. It's definitely going to make it into the control hunter deck. It makes me really excited to see how this control hunter deck will go. In Arena, this card's going to be really good. It's Consecration, except it costs 1 less mana. Sometimes they have more than 3 minions, but usually they don't. Power Word Glory. It's a lot like Blessing of Wisdom from Paladin. Also a 1 mana card, buffs a minion, and whenever a minion attacks, you get some benefit. This one's restore 4 health, the Paladin one's draw a card. You can also put it on the opponent's minion, and that's actually interesting. When you put it on an opponent's minion, it's almost like it kills their minion a lot of the time. Well, no, not quite. Actually, never mind. I'm completely wrong. It kills their minion if you have absolutely no minions, but it has the same downside as corruption, that the minion can just trade into your stuff. And this card's probably at its best when you use it similar to Blessing of Wisdom, where you have like cheap cards, and then you put the card on early, and then you start attacking for value. If you only get 4 health off of it, it's not nearly as good as Flash Heal, which is 1 mana restore 5. But if you get 2 attacks off, then for 1 mana you restored 8 health, and that's really good. Probably not going to see enough play, but worth mentioning that if you manage to get a sticky minion on the board, something with high health, and then you put Powered Glory on it, and you attack and it does manage to survive, and you do manage to attack again, 1 mana gain 8 is insane. And 1 mana and then constantly restore 4 health, that's really good. It's kind of comparable to Mistress of Pain. Mistress of Pain, you kind of need to put the buff on the Mistress of Pain to make it work. In Powered Glory, you kind of need to put on a minion. In Arena, this isn't going to work because just straight gaining health isn't really going to help your minion combat that much. And a lot of people are saying, oh man, you just put it on the opponent's minion and then they can't attack you. And that's true to some extent, but the thing is, they can still use it to like help board control, and yes, you still gain 4 health. You know, now that I think about it, it's not quite that bad, because it's not quite corruption in the sense that, like, if they attack you, you don't just permanently lose the health. It kind of forces them to go into your minions, and even if they do, you still gain health. So in a way, like, it kind of is better than Flash Heal, because you kind of force their minion, like a Wolf Rider, to suicide onto one of your minions, and you gain the health. So okay, it's pretty good anti-aggro card. Tiny Knight of Evil. There's not enough discard mechanics in the game to make this work. It's a 2 mana 3/2, which is fine for a baseline. It's got the demon sub tag, but yeah, this is not a big enough benefit to push a discard agenda. You're not gonna play the Tiny Knight of Evil into the Succubus, into the Soulfire. That deck isn't gonna happen. Though if you do manage to actually work Tiny Knight of Evil on turn 2 into turn 3 Succubus and then Soulfire, then you will have done something like turn 2 3/2, turn 3 you get a 4/3, and you dealt 4 damage, and you attacked them for 5. So that's something, but that would have to be like perfect. It doesn't work with Fel Reaver for the same reason that Fist of Jaraxxus doesn't work with Fel Reaver. You're not discarding cards when you mill them off the top of your deck. Wow, okay, I assume you do have Fist of Jaraxxus though. So here's the dream. Turn 2 Tiny Knight of Evil, turn 3 Succubus, discard Fist of Jaraxxus, Soulfire, discard Fist of Jaraxxus. Nah. In Arena, this is a 2-mana 3/2, which is okay. It's got a demon, so that's like slight benefit. So it'll be okay. It's like comparable to a slightly better Bloodfen Raptor. Void Crusher is a card I don't really understand, because it itself is a minion, which means in your attempt to like kind of cull both sides' minions, you have a risk of killing your own 6-mana card. And this is 6-mana 5/4. It's really bad. In Arena, it's really bad. I don't really see a redeeming quality in this. Like, I guess in theory you're supposed to play the Void Crusher, and then you're supposed to play Implosion, and then you use your hero power, and then like you have a greater chance of killing your imp, and then like they have a chance of killing their own thing. You can rig the scales in your favor. You can clear their board so they only have one big guy, but for the most part, it's 6-mana 5/4. It's just not going to work. And if you're doing like this with like the Inspire immediately, you would have to already have a board of stuff. And if you're just playing this as a 6-mana 5/4 and then trying to later Implosion, then you've paid 6 mana for a 5/4 and you're done. You can try to cheat it out with Void Caller, and then that's a free 5/4, and that's actually pretty good, but it's still not good enough, just because usually the demons you run with Void Caller need to be good enough that you want to individually play them sometimes. Beneath the Grounds, a really interesting card for the long game. Fits into Millrogue the best, since you can get their cards out of the way so quickly. If you want to be a Dreamer, you're basically paying 3 mana for 3 4/4s. Even paying 3 mana 4/4 would be good enough. But you're paying 3 mana for 3 4/4s. The problem is, it's over an unspecified, unknown amount of time. Like, possibly you shuffle it into the top 3 cards of their deck. I assume it's going to be like Burrowing Mine. And then they draw Ambush, and then they draw Ambush, and they draw Ambush, and bam! 3 mana for 12/12. That's value. If you're just playing in a normal control deck, then I think you can assume that you're going to get 2 4/4s over time in the natural course of a game. And that might be good enough if you think you can control the game long enough. In a Millrogue deck, you're usually going to mill them entirely, and you can kind of expect 3 4/4s, and those are going to help clear the board quite a bit. So this is a pretty exciting card. Obvious combos are to just put it into the Millrogue deck, which never really took off, and then you use the Cold Light, and then you gang up, and then you Cold Light, and then you Shadow Step, and then you Cold Light. You get a bunch of Nerubians also. Pretty interesting. Like Burrowing Mine, I don't expect them to skip the card draw. If they did, it would be insane, but Burrowing Mine just blows up, and I also expect the Ambush to like just pass by, and then they would also draw the card. So it's got a lot of potential. Very cool card. In Arena, this card is going to be too inconsistent. I think you could expect to pay 3 mana and then expect to get a 4/4, but it might be not for a while. And when you're paying 3 mana to possibly get a 4/4 sometime in the future and not do anything this turn, it's too slow. Confessor Paletress. This is a really exciting card, which has the strongest Inspire mechanic in the game. Summon a random legendary minion. A random legendary minion has like wildly varying power levels, but I think you can roughly assume it to be worth 5 mana, maybe 4 mana worth of value. So in that sense, if you were to manage to use the hero power, then it's like you gain 4 or 5 mana. This is all averages and rough math. And then it's like Confessor Paletress is like a 2 mana 5/4 or a 3 mana 5/4. This is why I'm really excited that Fencing Coach was printed, because you just play the Fencing Coach the turn before you're playing Confessor Paletress, and then instead of playing this on turn 9, you can play this on turn 7, and then use their hero power for free, and then you get your summon random legendary minion, you get it like a full 2 turns earlier, and that's great. This card almost requires you to play it with Fencing Coach, just because if you have to wait until 9 mana to do this, it takes a while. This card is comparable to Sneed's Old Shredder, which is Death Rattle summon a random legendary minion. You better believe that if you play Confessor Paletress, they're gonna try to kill that as quickly as possible. So it's almost like it's Battle Cry, summon a random legendary minion instead of Inspire. But those times where she does stick on the board, then you're gonna be set. If you could somehow put her behind a taunt, or if you could buff her the turn that it came out, then you're in business. But I think if you Fencing Coach and then Confessor Paletress and use the hero power, that might just be good enough to work. In Arena, this card is actually going to be too slow. Well, am I willing to pay 9 mana for a 5/4 and a random legendary minion? And the 5/4 basically is taunt. It's really slow, and I think it might be playable in Arena. In Constructed, I basically have the same thing to say. It's really slow, and it might be playable. And it's a lot more playable because of Fencing Coach. Dark Bargain. This is kind of the card that I was almost hoping for, but not quite. So Siphon Soul is a really inefficient card that Control Warlocks have had to use for a long time on 6 mana to destroy one enemy minion of your choice. Dark Bargain destroys 2 random ones, but usually you can set up the board, well, I can't even say usually, but if you're playing against big cards, then usually there would only be 1, maybe 2 of those. But boy, is that a heavy cost to discard 2 random cards. Discarding 2 random cards isn't really going to work out in Control, especially if you're basically discarding 2 random cards to deal with an extra enemy minion on top of what you would already get off of Siphon Soul, which is already inefficient. It's like, eh. The dream is that you discard the 2 Fist of Jaraxxuses, but meh. You know what would have been really interesting? If Fist of Jaraxxus had the text of like, whenever you would discard a card, you actually discard this card. That would be interesting. Then you would be able to possibly work these cards in. But as stands, the entire random discard mechanic, it's just 2 random for me, and 2 random for the control decks. So, no, it's not going to see play. In Arena, hard removal is cool, but this is also not going to see play. That cost is just too big. It's kind of like Naturalize, except you're destroying an extra minion. And of course, like, ideally, you get it so that you have no cards left, and then it's like Doomguard where you play it and you discard 2 random cards. Maybe that has some merit to it. It's interesting to think of this card in like Zoo, or a faster type of Zoo, where you try to finish with Dark Bargain, because the card is actually good if you can destroy 2 random enemy minions, and you don't discard cards. Kind of hard to set up, but maybe there's some potential there. In Arena, if you have a low curve, kind of for the same reason, maybe it would work. Acidmaw, 7 mana 4/2. So that's obviously completely laughable. It better have a really good text to do it, to justify this card. Whenever another minion takes damage, destroy it. Does that possibly justify a 7 mana 4/2? It's kind of like Mass Hunter's Mark, almost. Now, the reason why Hunter's got 2 legendaries is because you are supposedly supposed to combo it with the other Hunter legendary, the Dreadscale, which is also, well, the 3 mana 4/2 is obviously a lot more reasonable. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all other minions. That card's actually really exciting. It's like the Self-Pyromancer, and you can actually run this in Control Hunter. They were looking for some way to like draw more cards to be able to kind of control the scum out there with the one health minions. This card's really good. It's like Mini Baron Geddon. Doesn't hit face, which is good because Control Hunter doesn't want face to be hit. So this card's really good because independently it's great. Just repeatable whirlwinds every turn, which doesn't hit itself. Very exciting. And it's a beast. So you're supposed to combo the Acidmaw, which is the loser brother of the Worm Beast, I suppose. Sorry, Acidmaw. If you combo Acidmaw with Dreadscale, you do get to clear the board, and you get 2 4/2s for 10 mana. You can also combo Acidmaw with Unleash the Hounds, which kills their entire board, except Death Rattle. But that's a 10 mana clear. And if you were trying to do that, you might want to consider Deathwing instead. My kind of analysis on the Acidmaw Dreadscale situation is Dreadscale is going to see play, but Acidmaw will not. In Arena, it's basically the same thing. Acidmaw sucks, but Dreadscale is good. Evil Heckler, I could go into a tangent about how Booty Bay Bodyguard is one of the cards that if I could rebalance vanilla Hearthstone, I would rebalance probably Booty Bay Bodyguard as one of them, and I was thinking, okay, drop the mana cost down by 1. And here they have it, Evil Heckler. I'll go into the tangent later, but basically it's a better Booty Bay Bodyguard. And it's still probably not good enough, but it's a card, and it's completely fine that they outclassed Booty Bay Bodyguard. Maybe someday I'll go into my kind of analysis on vanilla cards which are really weak, could be buffed, but we aren't going to worry about it. Evil Heckler isn't quite strong enough to be played anyways. In Arena, this card is going to be fine. It's better than Lost Tall Strider, obviously. It's going to be like an average card. Fearsome Doomguard. It's an interesting new mana slash attack slash health value. We've never seen a 7 mana 6/8 before. It's definitely better than War Golem, which is not saying much. No one's going to play this in Constructed. It's a demon. But probably the one thing worth noting is that it is a pretty significant buff to Bane of Doom, because now you can get this fearsome 6/8 out of your Bane of Doom. That's incredible. I mean, it's one more mana than Boulder Fist Ogre, and if you want to play it in Constructed, you're never intending to pay 7 mana for it. But there aren't that many high-cost demons out there, and if your Void Color is a 4 mana 3/4, Death Rattle summon a 6/8, that's a pretty good card. Maybe we're going to see it in some budget Void Color decks. Ultimately, not good enough in Constructed. In Arena, it's probably better than War Golem, so it's going to be ranking a little bit better than that. Ice Rager shares a little bit of similarity to Evil Heckler in that it's a strict buff on a card that's already out. That's happened at least twice this expansion. The other one that some people haven't noticed is that Hunter card, the 2 mana 3/2 beast with a Joust upside of draw a card, buff on Bloodfin Raptor. But anyways, Ice Rager. Love the reference, the obvious one, to Magma Rager. And 3 mana 5/2? Hey, that's actually reasonable. In a world where 3 mana 4/3 is pretty reasonable, 3 mana 5/2? I actually think a 3 mana 5/2 is better than a 3 mana 4/3 in Constructed, because there's so many things for 5 that you want to take care of. And the thing about Magma Rager, which didn't work, was it's 1 health. You can use the Ice Rager to punch Emperor Thorsan, to punch Sludge Belcher, Shield Maiden, Yeti type cards. This card's actually pretty alright. Not gonna be powerful enough to see play, since it's so bad against a lot of the earlier 2 attack minions, such as Shielded Minibot. Again, I'm going to say it's fine that they didn't change Magma Rager. Magma Rager deserves to be a legend in its own right. The 3 mana 5/1, it's iconic. So, Ice Rager, funny card, great reference, not worthy in Constructed. In Arena, it's probably worse than a 4/3 because there's quite a few 2/3s that can kill it. I'm going to put this as around average to below average status. Certainly not abysmal, unlike its fiery brother. Mysterious Challenger. My, what an effect. I like to start with thinking about the dream. There is no limit on how many secrets this can put into play, other than, of course, all of them. All of the unique types. You may be a little bit surprised to learn that currently there are 5 Paladin secrets. And with the Grand Tournament, there's going to be the new one as well, bringing that number up to 6, which may be a bit of a surprise because it is possible that those who have only played Constructed have never seen a Paladin secret. The reason for that is because Paladin secrets cost 1 mana, and yeah, paying 1 mana for card doesn't cost very much, but the main problem is you're spending a card to do so. Yes, in theory, you can play the Mysterious Challenger, and you can get 6 cards out of your deck and onto the battlefield, and that's like 12 mana worth of value, and it's like a 7 for 1. But first of all, let's establish like a few secrets you're not going to run. You're not going to run Eye for an Eye. Alright. Possibly you'll run Avenge, you'll possibly run Noble Sacrifice, you'll possibly run Redemption. Those are 3 of the secrets that you generally over the course of Hearthstone have seen some constructed play. Repentance is no good because there's so many early game minions. So the question is, can you make a deck work with Avenge, Noble Sacrifice, Redemption? And I still don't think that new Paladin secret is any good. But we'll include it on the list of cards that might be worthwhile secrets. So the reason why Mad Scientist is good is because you generally don't want to draw your secrets early game. What you want to do is pull them out. And each time you draw a secret, it's almost like, ugh, if only I'd drawn the Mad Scientist instead. When you do draw the secret, ideally you want the secret to be worthwhile enough to play. Of all the ones out there, I feel like Avenge might be the only one that fits that. Possibly Redemption. Even Noble Sacrifice is a bit on the weak side. If you're playing the Mysterious Challenger on 6, the chance that you've drawn into your Avenge or Redemption get a lot higher. And Redemption possibly isn't even that good. You usually want to use the Redemption with the Divine Shield, with the Death Rattle type cards. So maybe you only have Avenge, and then suddenly if Mysterious Challenger is only pulling Avenge from your deck, it's not really good. That's a long-winded way of saying this is a really cool effect, and the fact that you can play this and then get 6 secrets into play is astounding. You could possibly Unstable Portal into it and then actually get your Mirror Entity counterspell and duplicate, and man, that would be something. But the problem is the Paladin secrets are only 1 mana, so it's not even that much value to pull them out, and all of them are still bad, fundamentally. Unfortunately, even though it's very competitively costed, it is a Paladin card, and the Paladin secrets, meh. So therefore, probably not going to work. As much as I want to dream of a Secret Keeper deck where you run a lot of the secrets, I've actually tried it out before because when Avenge came out, because I thought Avenge might be good enough to justify the Avenge, Noble Sacrifice, Redemption, and then you put the Secret Keeper, and then you possibly, it didn't work out, and I don't think Mysterious Challenger would change that. In Arena, 6 mana 6/6 is alright, especially when you're comparing to the Epic slot where there's a few bad cards. Paladin, by the way, has a few really good Epic cards in Arena, though. It gets better if you already have a secret in your deck, of course, but ultimately probably worse than Boulder Fist Ogre. The interesting question then is Mysterious Challenger worth it if you're only running the good secret, which I'm going to call Avenge, and 6 mana 6/6 Battlecry put an Avenge into play from your deck? That's to me. So I don't really see it happening. Orgrimmar Aspirant. So the thing about these Inspire cards, we've seen a lot of them at the 3 mana 3/3 slot. And the problem is, okay, you can play a 3 mana 3/3, but it doesn't do anything the turn it comes out necessarily unless you also use the hero power. And if you're using the hero power, then it's a 5 mana 3/3 and you're just giving your weapon +1 attack. That's kind of minor. I will say that wolf is looking mighty fierce, though. Feels like it should have an effect more than just giving your weapon +1 attack, but that's what it is. It's not going to be good enough. If you're paying 5 mana to upgrade your weapon, and that is a card, haven't seen that card in a while, it's just not good enough. In Arena, this card is actually going to be pretty good, because 3 mana 3/3, that's okay. And weapons are a big deal in Arena. You could afford to play the 3 mana 3/3 and then have the option of buffing up your weapon. It's a nice little bonus side effect. Probably going to be a slightly above average card in Arena. This card is hilarious. The Legend of Huffer continues. That's what this card is obviously based around. Polymorph Boar transforms a minion into a Huffer. There's 2 ways to use this card. One is to use it as removal. You can use it to get rid of the Death Rattle effect, similar to Polymorph. And 2 health, it's not quite as easy to kill as a sheep's 1 health, but you can use a minion, like maybe a Mad Scientist, to kill the target, and 3 mana kind of hard removal. It's very cute. But the other type of thing you can do to it is simply 3 mana and then deal 4 damage, basically. Use it on a card that you've already attacked with in an aggressive deck, such as a Mana Worm, and then you polymorph it, and then you just deal 4 to the face. Now the problem is 3 mana to deal 4 damage to the face isn't actually that efficient, but you're not just dealing 4 mana to the face, you're also gaining a 4/2. And you're probably playing on a minion that's already near dead. A really good target for it, by the way, is Tempo Mage's Mirror Image. You can go Mirror Image, and then you polymorph Boar, one of the images, and then you just get a Huffer. Better yet, it's going to be behind another Mirror Image. Very fun, flexible card, and I see some real possibilities for it. With your heavy control decks, you're still probably going to use Polymorph more, but maybe your aggro spell-based tempo decks, which run Mirror Image, will see some use out of the Polymorph. A cheap spell gets a 4/2. Obviously, you would play 3 mana for a 4/2 with Charge, so the goal is to use it on a minion that's as weak as possible, or to finish. Abusive Sergeant, for example, is a good card to use it on. You've used the Battle Cry, you just Polymorph Boar. Could fit into one of those really fast mage decks. And not to mention, just gets rid of the taunts also. You turn their taunt into Huffer, Pow. Very cool. In Arena, I think this card will be fairly reasonable to good, because in a world where Polymorph is good, Polymorph Boar should also serve as like pretty good removal for the really, really high-end stuff. You will use it in combination with another one of your minions to kill it off. There's always the flexibility of, again, using it to finish off the opponent. You can use it on one of your minions that is already attacked, and then just turn into a Boar, 3 mana, deal 4. Kind of flexible in that respect. Very cool card design. Priests! You have looked far and wide for a 2 mana card, and you found it! Wyrmrest Agent. 2 mana, 2/4 taunt! Wow! That actually sounded more impressive when I was just reading it, but now that I read it out loud, 2 mana, 2/4 taunt, which is conditional. We've had a Robo Cub from Druid, 2 mana, 2/3 taunt. That didn't make too many splashes. But you add a health or an attack to a card that's really low in the mana scale, and it does become insane. A 2 mana 2/4 would see play, especially in more aggressive metas, especially in Priest, especially since you can then heal it, especially since you can protect your North Shower Cleric, whereas Druids perhaps didn't have anything on 1 mana that was very necessary to protect. It may be difficult to actually play it on too, since you would have to hold a dragon, and your open mulligan would have to, if you were going first, you would want to keep Wyrmrest Agent and a dragon, and then you'd only have 1 more card. The more I look at it, it's like, it's kind of difficult to justify all of this put together. But yeah, it certainly looks like an include if a Priest Dragon deck were to come around. The interesting thing to ask is if Twilight Whelp would be in that Priest Dragon deck. And the answer is probably yes, but you would have to hold exactly Twilight Whelp, Wyrmrest Agent, and another dragon, because you would want to play the Twilight Whelp on turn 1. And that's not to say that Twilight Whelp is an auto-include. You might just run the Zombie Chow instead. You might not run any 1-drops, and you just run the usual standard dragons. Maybe you run the Twilight Drake, the Azure Drake, some big dragons like Ysera. But yeah, I like a 2 mana 2/4 taunt, which takes a little bit of work. That's a fine card. In Arena, a 2 mana 1/4 isn't good enough. So if you have a bunch of dragons, a bunch saying like 3 or 4 plus, then yeah, it's a bit more reasonable, but it's still really hard to get this together in Arena. The Shaman legendary card, the Mistcaller. Give all minions in not only your hand, but also your deck +1/+1. The ultimate in long-term value. Unfortunately, it doesn't buff your totems as you summon them, but every other card gets a buff. Probably the card most comparable to this one would be Sword of Justice, a 3 mana buff the next 5 things you play, including recruits. Sword of Justice isn't seeing play because it's basically 3 mana do nothing. The Mistcaller stats are obviously bad for its mana cost. I mean, necessarily so because the effect is so strong. For a 4/4, you would want to pay something around 3.5 mana for it. So we're going to say that this effect is about 2.5 mana. So that is a buff on Sword of Justice, because 1, Sword of Justice costs 3 mana, 2, Sword of Justice only buffs the next 5 cards, so Sword of Justice isn't seeing any play, but this one might. So how many minions do you have to play to make the Mistcaller justified is an interesting question. How much worth of stats do you need for a 6 mana card to be good? Boulderfist Ogre isn't good enough, so a 6/7 isn't good enough. Would a 7/7 be good enough? Well, that would be BGHable, but 7/7 in stats might still not be good enough. You're probably looking for something around the lines of like a 7/8 worth of stats, or basically 15 stats. You have 8 stats here. So you're looking for 7 more stats, so you're basically looking for 3 more minions to be played. And when you think about it, okay, it's pretty easy to play 3 minions over the course of the game. But the thing is, if you are getting it over time, it's worth less than now. Like the saying goes, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today, which is to show that future value needs to be discounted when you take into account for present value. Similar to Sword of Justice, which could be thought of as +5/+5, or in an extreme it's 3 mana 5/5, it isn't seeing any play because it's over time. And 3 mana 5/5 is obviously really good. So the Mistcaller is going to actually need more than just 4 buffs to work. And this text is minions, by the way, which means minions summoned by spells, such as the Spirit Wolves from Feral Spirit don't get buffs. So you're going to need to play at least 4 minions in order for the Mistcaller to be considered possibly profitable, or that's like the break-even point. And by the way, if you play like Dr. Boom, your Dr. Boom becomes an 8/8, but the Boom bots are still 1/1s. And also 6 mana is around the point where the game has entered the mid-late game, generally, and it's usually where games have already been decided. It suffers kind of a similar fate to Trogzor, where in theory the long-term prospect for it is pretty good, and with Trogzor you even have the immediate threat of, if they want to kill it, they have to give you a 3/5. This problem is similar to Justicar Trueheart, actually, where you're paying 6 mana for a minion which is clearly not worth 6 mana, but over time you build up enough value such that it's worth it. You basically need to reliably have the game drag another about 4 turns before starting to gain the benefits from it. The question is just whether or not that can be done. Obviously, if you go on for like 10 turns, the Mistcaller will have been one of the best plays you've made. One thing that's interesting is the Mistcaller kind of works with Neptulon pretty well, because you play Mistcaller, you play Neptulon, and you're getting 4 minions. Wait, that doesn't actually work. Oh, that doesn't work. Okay, so not even Neptulon really works, because you play the Mistcaller and then you play Neptulon, and the minions in your hand came from Neptulon, which means that they weren't affected by the battlecry of the Mistcaller. So you'd have to even do it the other way around. You'd have to play Neptulon first and then Mistcaller. Some people have thought about using pandas with this, and then you're building super ridiculous value, and the drawback of that is you have to put Youthful Brewmaster into your deck. Granted, that's not terrible, but it does by default kind of weaken your deck a little bit. So to this card, I kind of issue a question. I pose a question. Should I really be calling a card good? Does it matter if I'm right, if I call this card good and it's good, if I call it bad and it's good, if I call it good and it's bad? On this one, I'm going to just be like, oh, who knows? It's going to just be a card that people are going to try out, and it could be great, it could be terrible. It's one of those things which you're going to have to try out to see. The only things I really know are that you basically need to get at least 4 minions before the value becomes apparent. You basically need at least 3 turns after Mistcaller to be played for it to be kind of worth it, which leads me to go down the line of I think it's too hard to do, but this is kind of similar to my theory about Justicar True Heart, which was you need to use your hero power 3 times, and yet I was still thinking, okay, that one might be reasonable in the right decks. If your deck can go long enough, then hey, you're going to get a lot of value. And there's Shaman tools to draw it into the long game, especially that new Shaman card, the Super Flame Strike Overload card. And it's going to take a while before I start to know these cards by name. But a really interesting card. I think it's cost appropriately. We'll see whether or not it's good. If I really were forced to give an answer, I'd be like, I think it's a little too slow. In Arena, this card is going to probably be pretty good because Arena games do tend to go on a bit longer. And I think you can usually summon at least 3-4 minions after your Mistcaller. And that is all of the cards of the Grand Tournament. It's going to be interesting to see how some things shake out. I think the overall picture is that there's some new archetypes that are possible, and there's some new tricks that can be put into old decks, and that it's pushed a bit more of a control theme. So, cheers to that. I think I will have one more video released before the set comes out in its entirety about now that we can actually see every card, do I want to change my opinion on any of the earlier cards I reviewed? One thing comes to mind immediately, Wilfred Fizzlebang, because of the free hero power. And I'll kind of give the general overview of what I think of the set. When I look at all the cards together, all lined up nicely in a row. Because really, you do need to see the entire picture before you can give an assessment of cards. And now that we have the entire picture, I'm just going to take a moment to look at the picture. So thanks for keeping up with my reviews. Hope you found my look at them to be sane. See you at the Grand Tournament.